Hey everyone, it's Hailey, and today I'm going to be doing part one of a three-part series of books that I have read during quarantine. My most recent reads video was featuring books that I have loved recently, and then I ended up taking a break, and basically since that video I've read 21 books, so I have like 21, maybe it's 22, I can't really remember. My point is I have quite a few books to talk about and I wasn't exactly sure how I wanted to split them up, so I just decided to split them up into 3 random groups, just talking about books that I have read since quarantine started, because one of these books I literally read at the end of March. Like, that is how far back we're going. Now, quarantine isn't over. We are still in the midst of a pandemic, so you need to not let your guard down. You need to be wearing your masks, all of that stuff. Be sure you're washing your hands, being safe and everything. But I just thought that like this made sense as a way to kind of split these books up logically. So let's just get into it. Hello, so I'm just editing this video, but I just neglected to mention in the beginning that all of these little mini reviews will be spoiler free, and if there was a particular book that you were looking to hear my thoughts on, I will have timestamps as well as a list of all the books that I'm going to talk about in the description down below for you guys. Like I mentioned, one of these books I actually read at the end of March, and that was Starry by Jenn Bennett. Now, I had read one other Jenn Bennett novel before this one, and since then I have read some more, but this one is probably my least favorite. I think I initially gave it a 4 out of 5 stars, but I think that a more accurate rating would be like a 3.5 out of 5 stars. This book follows Zori and Lennon, who used to be best friends, and I initially thought that this was going to be a story about friendship, but it's more a romance, second chance romance, which I generally like, but I think it was one of those cases where I was expecting something different from it, so that's kind of what hindered my enjoyment a little bit. But they now don't get along, they don't really talk anymore, and their families are even bitter rivals. So Zori and Lennon both happen to be going on this group camping trip together in the California wilderness, and it ends up going south very, very quickly, and they end up finding themselves totally stranded together with only each other to survive. So there is a little element of a survival story in here as well. A couple things I think happened for me with this book, and it's not that I didn't enjoy it because I had fun reading it. I just found a lot of it dragged. The pacing was a little bit off, but I also think the fact that, one, I thought it was going to be something completely different than what it was, and two, I had really high expectations going into this one. When I said I wanted to read it, or when I hauled it, or I can't even remember when, but a bunch of you guys commented saying how much you loved it, so I think I just was waiting to fall in love with it and waiting to understand why this book was so popular, and it never happened for me. I liked the characters a lot. They were good. I think though I felt like the story was a bit disjointed. So the first half is very different than the second half, and it kind of felt like it didn't go together. Like, I thought that the group camping trip was going to be a huge thing. I thought that those other characters, the side characters that they go on the camping trip with, were going to come into the story more, but they weren't really that involved, and it kind of was just an annoying part of it and really forgettable ultimately. Especially like there's initially a love interest, and I just didn't see like how that, I don't know, I didn't like that part, and I totally kind of forgot it happened at all. I liked the setting of this, and I also liked the fact that it was kind of like a star-crossed lovers story, and it was kind of in that way a Romeo and Juliet retelling, like really loosely. There was a decent amount of drama. You have the friendship drama, but that, like I said, I kind of was met on, and then there was a lot more family drama than I was expecting. But Zori has a really great support system. Like, there are some great parents in here, but there's also a really crappy parent. Zori's dad is horrible, but her adoptive mother is so sweet, and I just loved her. Lennon's mothers are also so great. They own a sex shop, which is why there's this family rivalry, because her asshole father hates the fact that they own this sex shop right next to his, I think he was a lawyer, I can't remember, but right next to his office, so all his clients don't want to go there anymore. But it's also, there's a little bit more to that than meets the eye. But I loved Lennon's support system, and the fact that they also cared for Zori so much. And like I said, her Korean stepmother, I totally loved. Like, I loved that relationship between them, and that was really well developed and delved into. So really, ultimately, it was just a story that had some great maternal figures in it. But like I said, the setting was cool. I liked the stargazing aspect of it because Zori does really love stargazing, but I found that that kind of also fell to the wayside, and there was just ultimately a lot of time where there wasn't a lot happening. Like, there's a few key scenes that stick out to me that I remember, but for the most part, I found the story to be kind of forgettable. Like, I liked the banter between Zori and Lennon, but I don't think I was in love with the romance enough for that to make me fall in love with the story. Like, it wasn't bad. There were a lot of things that I liked about it. I didn't hate the characters. I didn't hate their relationship. It just, I think, didn't meet my expectations, and that was the ultimate issue for me. I feel like if I had gone into this story not expecting anything, I probably would have liked it a lot more, but unfortunately, that's just how it happens sometimes. Next is The Librarian of Auschwitz by Antonio Iturbe, translated by Lilith Thwaites. This is based on the real-life experiences of Auschwitz prisoner Dita Kraus, and the author is Spanish, so this was initially written in Spanish, or originally is the word that I wanted to use, but he had interviews with her and did a lot of research and came up with this fictional story kind of surrounding her life, but there's also a lot of other things going on. So this is kind of another instance of having expectations, but I don't think it was that anyone put those expectations on me. It just sounded like something I was really going to love. Now, I gave this a 2.5 out of 5 stars, and I kind of struggled to talk about my feelings about this book because it is based in real life, and my judgments on it aren't so much on the actual, like, experience in the actual story. It's more so the telling of it is where I had a lot of issues. And I don't know if that's because it's a translation, but it's hard for me to kind of say because obviously I can't read the original. So Dita is 14 years old, and she is a prisoner at Auschwitz concentration camp alongside her mother and her father. And there's this other prisoner, Freddie Hirsch, who approaches her, and he asks her to keep guard over the 8 precious books that prisoners were able to sneak past the guards into the camp. That's all they have. They have this block of the camp where they run a school, and those books are obviously essential to that. So she therein becomes the librarian of Auschwitz. I think that this book tried to do too much, and that was a lot of the issue. There were a lot of times where the librarian aspect of the story fell to the wayside, and there were a lot of different side plots that didn't quite connect. I mean, they did connect, but I think that it would have been more successful if they were in their own books, because it made it a little bit hard to connect to Dita, and I think I kind of, like, once again was expecting something different just given the title, but she wasn't always the main character, and I think that's why, like, I guess I struggled to connect. I don't know if that's the right thing that, like, I mean to say right now. Really, I think that the story was lacking direction because there were so many things going on that it was very jarring. I was jerked this way and that, and there were a lot of very powerful and poignant moments, but I think that just because it was very oversaturated almost, I missed those moments. And the other thing is the writing was very, very plain. That might be just the translation, but I understand that the subject matter is heavy enough that it speaks for itself, but it was almost too plain at times, and it just read more like a textbook than it did a fictional story. Now, I will say that at the end, I think it's an afterword or an epilogue, I can't exactly remember. Postscript, that's the word that I'm looking for. So there's a postscript written by the author about his research that he did, and it's not a fictional account. He's actually telling the factual thing, and that part was way more impactful to me than the book actually was. Like, I was way more invested in that. So I think I may have enjoyed this more as a nonfiction than I did as a fictional story. The lack of description and all the stuff that was going on kind of led to the story being diluted, and I think it could have been better than it was. Like, I just don't know if the method of storytelling really matched the story. Now, to actually talk about the plot a little bit, I did find Dita to be an intriguing character, and the subplots that were happening I was also interested in, but I just don't think that they all meshed together in this book, and it just kind of made it a more difficult read than it should have been. Like, emotionally, it's a difficult read, obviously. It's very heavy, but I think that it also was difficult because of the writing. I hope that made sense. Basically, I find this really hard to rate because I appreciate the story and I appreciate what the author was trying to do. I just don't know how successful it was. Next is The Bride Test by Helen Hoang. This I listened to the audiobook for, and I'm glad that I finally read it. It is the companion to The Kiss Quotient, which I read a year ago now, or no, it was last year. And this is following one of the characters from there, but you don't have to have read the first one in order to read this one. They're just companions, so it's just fun. You'll like recognize characters from the first one and be like, oh, like there they are again. So this is following Kai from the first book, and Kai thinks that he's defective because he doesn't feel emotions as other people do. He doesn't feel them as deeply and doesn't feel those important emotions, but his family knows that it is just because of his autism. It just makes him process and feel emotions differently than other people might. Kai doesn't really want a relationship at all because of many reasons, but his mother decides to take matters into her own hands and find him the perfect bride. She goes to Vietnam and she meets Esme, who is a mixed race girl who is living in Ho Chi Minh City, and she can't pass up the opportunity to go to America and potentially find a husband and get a better life for herself and her family. This is told in dual perspective between Kai as he's trying to navigate this relationship that he doesn't really want, and Esme as she is trying to seduce him and make him like her. I listened to the audiobook for this and it was enjoyable. I didn't enjoy it quite as much as The Kiss Quotient, but there were a lot of things that this one did that I really appreciated. I particularly loved watching Esme as she was trying to navigate this totally new culture, and as she's trying to make so much effort to improve her life for her and her family. But obviously being in America is so different than Vietnam as she's used to it, and she's very shocked by the differences in their culture, and she also is very shocked by Kai and surprised as their relationship develops. Lack of communication is a huge issue in this book, and generally that's not my favorite with romances. I understand why it's a kind of trope in romances, but in this instance I didn't mind it so much because it made sense. It fit. Like, Kai is very self-conscious about how he feels emotions and he doesn't want to talk about it. He's very private and keeps to himself, and that's why it completely made sense why there was this miscommunication. And even on the side of Esme, she doesn't want to upset him, she doesn't want to ruin things, so she also keeps her feelings to herself. The culture of Vietnam was at the forefront of this story, and I loved that aspect of it. I think it was beautifully written, and autism spectrum disorder was also very central to the plot, and it is an own voices story for the Vietnamese culture and for autism spectrum disorder, and those features are both in the first book, and I think this showed a different side of autism spectrum disorder than it did in The Kiss Quotient, and I enjoyed learning more about that. There was so much angst surrounding this story because it's kind of a like will they won't they, because neither of them are really like saying their true feelings, and I liked the romance because the characters matched very well. They were both super sweet and just made the perfect match, but I don't think I felt as connected to the characters as I could have. I did enjoy watching them develop. I think the character development in this book was fantastic, and I also loved how the family was at the forefront again. Family was at the forefront of The Kiss Quotient, and that was one of my favorite things about it, and this definitely had that same thing going for it. I don't really know why I didn't enjoy this one quite as much as The Kiss Quotient. I did still really like it. I gave it a 3.5 out of 5 stars. Maybe closer to a 3, but I think 3.5 is a solid rating for it. But I think ultimately there were times when the characters did annoy me a little bit, and there were also moments when the plot dragged, and that was particularly the ending I found was dragged out, but I still thought it was a really great read, and I will be reading the next book as well. I don't remember who it focuses on, but I'm excited for it. Next up is another adult romance, and that is Undercover Bromance by Lyssa K. Adams. This is the companion novel once again again, that's kind of something that the adult romance genre does, is companion novels where you don't have to have read the first book, but it helps if you have, like it makes it a little bit more fun. But this is the companion to the Bromance book club, which I super enjoyed. Once again, didn't enjoy this one quite as much. I gave it a 3.5 out of 5 stars. It follows Liv and Braden Mack. So Liv is the sister of, is her name Thea? I think her name was Thea from the first book, and she's kind of a difficult character in the first book, and she's also a little bit of a difficult character in this one, but I really enjoyed her. Like, I don't think I have quite as many issues with her as a lot of other people do. I know that's the main reason why people like don't like this book, but have struggled with it, is because they don't like her, but I found that I could kind of understand her motivations at times. So I don't know what that says about me, but don't get me wrong, there were instances where I was like, but I did appreciate her. So Liv has the dream job as a sous chef for this celebrity chef, but it's actually not the dream job because he is actually an ass. And she ends up actually getting fired from her job after confronting him after she catches him sexually harassing one of her co-workers. So Braden Mack happens to be there for that whole thing, and she has to turn to him for help with taking him down in this sting operation, which is inspired by the book that the book club is reading. Because if you don't know, the Bromance book club, it's just this group of, like, I mean, it's a book club, but it's a bunch of Nashville's elite and top men, and they read romance novels, and I love that. So they're reading a romantic suspense novel, and they are going to use that as a kind of guide to take down this absolutely terrible person. I loved the setup for this romance because I do think that Braden and Liv were a pretty good match. I love Braden. He is one of my favorite characters. There's just something about him that I can't even like think of how to describe him, because he's not really a bad boy, but he's kind of a sarcastic, like, sweet guy, and I just love that. He tries so hard, and I just think that is adorable. You got to see more of Liv in this book, which I think is why I came to appreciate her a little bit more, because since it was central on her, I don't think that's the word I wanted to use, but we're going with it. But in the last book, she was just a side character, but now you got to know more of her thoughts, more of her motivations, and her background as well, which I think definitely frames a lot of the decisions that she makes and her as a character overall. The first half of this book was a little bit hard to get into. At times, like, so these books have really important messages, and at times I think they come across as very in your face. And it's not that I disagree with the messages at all. Obviously this one deals with sexual harassment as a main topic, and I appreciated what the story was advocating for. However, there were times when it took me out of the fantasy, if you will, because it turns to very plain and almost like essay formal language to get these points across, and it just completely sucks me out of the story. I had the same issue with the first book, but this one I think way more so. However, in the second half of the book, the message was more blended into the story, so I did appreciate the conversations that were happening, and I felt like they felt more organic. One of the things with those teachable moments is in the beginning they were like one after the other, very consecutive, so it just kind of felt like there wasn't a lot of story and it was just a lot of message and morals. And once again, I want to say, like, I don't disagree with what was being said. I absolutely do support the message. I just think it could have been integrated a little bit better. I loved how the book club became involved though in this whole sting heist operation. That was a lot of fun to read about. Like, I feel like it's such an interesting and weird concept that I've never thought of before, but the book club works so well. Liv's life is also interesting. Like, she lives on this farm, and I loved the characters that came along with living on the farm, and just the farm itself, like the rooster that attacks all men who come up. Like, that was great. It was just a great fun addition. I think that this book, like the first one, was a good mix of steamy, romantic, sweet, but also funny. And there is also, like I said, because of all the teaching moments, there is a lot of serious aspects to it as well. But while there are funny moments and also those romantic moments and all of that, there's also a lot of serious parts too, but there's a good balance between all of it. Some of the drama was melodramatic and over the top, but for the most part, I did really enjoy this, and I think think it was a solid follow-up. Next is another adult romance. I promise it's the last one here. I had a week where I did a reading vlog just reading adult romances, so that's where all these are coming from. I'll have any reading vlogs where I read any of these books linked down below for you guys, because actually most of these books I did read in a reading vlog. I think Starry Eyes is the only one that I didn't, so that's good. But next is Say You Still Love Me by K.A. Tucker. This is my second K.A. Tucker book, and I didn't like it as much as the first one that I read, which that seems to be a theme in this like wrap-up sort of thing, but it's because the last video that I did for recent reads was about all the books that I had loved recently, so any books that I enjoyed a lot are in that video and they don't fit with this time period. I don't know if that makes sense, but yeah, a lot of these books are like 3 out of 5 star reads, just kind of okay, but I still want to talk about them with you guys. So this one I gave a 3 out of 5 stars, which a 3 out of 5 stars isn't a bad rating. It doesn't mean I didn't enjoy a book. It just means I thought it was okay. It didn't blow me away or anything. It was good, but it wasn't great. So this is a second chance romance, which is one of my favorite tropes of all time for romance. I absolutely love it. It's where there's like a romance that could have been or almost was or was, but then something happens where they're torn apart, but then in the book they come together again and it finally works out. So 12 years ago, Piper and Kyle were camp counselors together, and they haven't seen each other since there was an incident that tore them apart, but camp is still very much a part of Piper's life. Like, she still lives with her 2 best friends who were camp counselors that same summer. Now Piper is 29 and she is set to take over her dad's multi-million-dollar real estate development company. As she is set to finally make the transition from being VP to being president, she is totally thrown off because she runs into Kyle, which completely complicates everything. I'm sad I didn't like this one more because it just sounded like something that I would love, just, I mean, the second chance romance thing, but I can't pinpoint why it didn't fully work for me. I think a lot of it is I didn't really feel the chemistry between the 2 characters, which ultimately is very important for a romance, so that kept me from connecting with it. But I don't know if like the camp thing is just a me thing. I don't know if this affected my enjoyment of it, but I've never like experienced camp, so I don't know what it's like, but it seems very intense to like have these 2 girls that you met at camp and you still live together. I don't know where that sentence was going, but I think my suspension of disbelief was kind of thrown a little bit with this one because of how intertwined camp was in her life 29 years later when, or no, 29 years later, 12 years later, when she only went for a summer. And I understand like love at first sight happens and you can have such a poignant connection. Also, it's a freaking book, but I think it just didn't work for me. And I hate when I have those like little critiques where I'm like, it's a book, like obviously it's not going to be like real life, but I just don't think I loved the camp thing. I don't know, I think it might just be my pessimistic side, but I found it hard to believe that such a powerful connection would come out of absolutely nowhere at camp, and it just, I think it's because I didn't feel the chemistry that suspension of disbelief bothered me so much, because a lot of times I'm like, it's a book, and I'm not really bothered by those things that generally bother other people, but this time it did bug me. I also didn't care for the fact that a lot of the romance scenes, most of them arguably, took place when they were younger, so when the characters were 17. I didn't really like that. I would have liked to see more of the adult romance, but yeah. Now those romance scenes are set in the past because this book is alternating between then and now, so you follow in this kind of will they won't they manner, and there was a lot of emotion to this story, but I think it lacked the emotional depth that made me enjoy The Simple Wild, which I still didn't enjoy as much as other people had. I think it was once again too hyped up for me, but this one had a solid balance of emotions. I just think there were like a lot of things that just, something didn't click. Speaking of something not clicking, next is The Betrothed by Kiera Cass. I give this a 1.5 out of 5 stars, and I feel like that might be a little bit generous, but like, ugh. Gosh, I was so excited for this book. I really loved the selection. I don't know how I would feel about it if I reread it now, but when I initially read it, I super enjoyed it. So I was really excited when she was coming out with another royalty book similar to the selection, but it was not. So Lady Hollis has been living the life at court, trying to capture the king's attention, capture his heart, and have him choose her as his bride, and she's super excited when he does. But then as she gets more integrated into court life, she realizes that it might not be everything that she wanted it to be, and especially when there is a foreigner who comes and she realizes that he might change everything for her. So I wasn't expecting a profound read. I had pretty low expectations because while I really enjoyed the selection, I wasn't that big of a fan of the 2 books that follow America's Daughter that were added afterwards, and I also didn't like The Siren by her. But I was cautiously optimistic, and this just lacked substance and depth. I mean, I guess depth is the wrong word, although like the selection did have a certain amount of depth. While it was really fun and cute and fluffy, it also had like different levels to it. But this one just was completely one note. It just hit that one level. The romance didn't even have substance, and I think that was the main issue. The love interest, like the characterization for everyone was shaky. For Lady Hollis, for her love interest, who I could not describe if you asked me to, it was super insta-love. And there are times when I'm like, okay, it's a book, I can be okay with insta-love, but in this instance, it just was like, I was like, what? And like, am I missing something here? Because that's kind of what I felt. I did enjoy that family was brought into it and family dynamics came into it. That was a plus for me, but I think that it was kind of divided into like first half and second half, and there were characters that were one way in the first half and then they completely changed. And I guess it's kind of because she was seeing them differently, but like it just didn't seem realistic or like it fit, and it was very unexpected. I will say the beginning pulled me in. I was super into it, but it lost me very quickly as it just kind of never like hit any other levels. Everything that I loved about the selection wasn't there. There was a political plot line that was going on, but it was entirely behind closed doors, so it didn't bring anything to the story. There was the romance plot line, which did nothing for me, and then like the character development wasn't there, and there were a lot of tragic things that happened, but I didn't care. I didn't feel anything because I didn't feel connected to the characters. I didn't think that they had anything going for them. This was just like bare bones, and there was nothing elevating it. I feel like really mean saying all of this, but there just wasn't any stakes to the story. There wasn't anything to it. The world building didn't exist. I couldn't tell you anything about the world. I know like Lady Hollis was pretty much perfect. There was like basically nothing wrong with her, so her character was very bland, and it just made it super boring because there was no angst, no romantic tension. Like this is one of the few instances where I say that a love triangle I think would have very much helped the story. I hated the love triangle in the selection, but maybe I also didn't hate it because it kept the story going. But there was nothing really to keep the story going or get the ball rolling here. And the first half set up this plot, and then the second half was just like, okay, anything's gonna happen now. And overall, it just like, it was very sad. I'm really sad I didn't like it more, but yeah. Next is The Time of Our Lives by Emily Wibberley and Austin Siegemund-Broka. I give this one a 3.5 out of 5 stars, so I kind of have mixed feelings on it, but it follows Fitz and Juniper, and Fitz has wanted to go to a college near his hometown because his mother has early onset Alzheimer's, so he doesn't know when things are gonna get bad, but eventually he knows that she's going to need him to be there for him. Sorry. But on the other hand, Juniper wants to go to college as far away as she possibly can from her very tight-knit and overbearing family. So the two of them end up meeting on college tours, and that's essentially how the story gets going. The college tour premise was a bit weird for me initially because it just like, you don't really have that in Canada, and not at least to that extent, but that was just a minor thing. Like that didn't affect my enjoyment of it. It just kind of took me a while to understand what was happening. I think this book did a lot of things really well. I think it dealt with the transitional period between high school and college and all the questions that arise there and all the conflicts of interest, like what's going to happen with your friends, what's going to happen, like Juniper's dating someone at the beginning, but they don't want to go to the same schools necessarily. So she's like, what's going to happen happen with our relationship? Like, how am I going to leave my family? And you're really just going on your own and kind of thrown into things, and it's so different. And I think that this book did a good job of going through those questions. Like in grade 12, you basically have to make these decisions to plan the rest of your life, which is obviously so hard, especially for Fitz having a parent who he knows needs him. That is just an added level of pressure to it. It's just so much pressure. And I think this book, through these two characters, because they have pretty opposing views on what they want to do next year with the rest of their lives even, and that conflict of interest almost helped to go through all the different options and all the different feelings that you might be feeling in grade 12 when you have to make these decisions. So I feel like wanting change but also being afraid of it, that was like a central thing going on here, and I liked exploring that through these characters. However, I didn't like the romance plotline. It felt very forced to me and unnecessary. I didn't buy into the chemistry of their relationship. It was pretty insta-love, and I don't think that the romance really added anything to it. I think they could have just been friends who met on these college tours. So it felt very fabricated, and that's why my rating is kind of a little bit lower. However, I will say the ending did change my mind on that a little bit. I liked how the story ended. Also, like I mentioned, Juniper starts with a boyfriend, and it's not cheating, but like it's kind of a bit questionable. Like, I don't know. I didn't like the romance at all. Although once again, this is a book where family units came into the story, and I love when family comes into the story because I don't know, I really enjoy it. So Juniper has this giant Mexican-American family, and I loved hearing from them, and I just thought they were really sweet. And then Fitz and his brother goes with him on these college tours, and they're both actually adopted because his mother didn't want to have biological children because she knew that they would have a good chance of inheriting early onset Alzheimer's like she has. Of course, on the little bit of my last book that I'm talking about, my camera battery dies, so sorry about that. But anyways, this one was pretty different for these authors. I've read all of their books actually, and this one was more bittersweet and not as fun as the others. Like, it's not that it wasn't fun, but I think it dealt with a bit more serious subject matter, and I did like that change. I think Always Never Yours is still my favorite by them, but this one also was the first one of theirs that isn't a Shakespeare retelling. But yeah, that was the last book for my list, so I thought I had Verona comics on here, but it will be in my next video, which I'll be filming soon because I want to get caught up on recent reads before I get super behind again. But this one is in the thumbnail, so I just wanted to address that. So I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. Please let me know what you have read recently, what your favorite recent read is, and if you have read any of these books, your thoughts on them. I would love to know. But thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in my next video soon. Bye!